President Biden says a Russian invasion of Ukraine would be the largest invasion since World War II.
His comments come as the U.S. continues to deliver military supplies and weapons in preparation for a possible invasion. The president's remarks reflect a growing consensus that any conflict in Ukraine will quickly escalate beyond the country's borders. For more on all this, we want to bring in Nicole Killian and Steve Portnoy. Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent, and Steve is a White House correspondent for CBS News Radio. Stephen, let me start with you. The president made a lot of news on Ukraine today while at a gift shop on Capitol Hill, of all places. You were there, so let's play a little bit of what he said, and then I'll ask you about it.
There will be enormous consequences if he were to go in and invade, as he could, the entire country, or a lot less than that as well, for Russia, not only in terms of economic consequences and political consequences, but it will be enormous consequences worldwide. This would be the largest, if he were to move in with all those forces, it would be the largest invasion since World War II. It would change the world.
It would change the world. So, Stephen, what else did he have to say? And who do you think that message was meant for?
Well, I think it was meant for Vladimir Putin. I think it was meant for Europe. And I think in part it was meant for the American people. Look, the president was asked today whether he believes that a Russian invasion of Ukraine is more or less likely now. And he said essentially he doesn't know. He says even people close to Putin don't know. He compared it to reading tea leaves. What he also said was that he might, in the near term, order some of the 8,500 troops who've been put on a heightened state of alert for deployment to Eastern Europe. He said he might do it in the near term because it would take time for those service members to redeploy and position in Eastern Europe. He says it wouldn't be provocative. That is to say, it wouldn't be a direct threat or intended to be a direct threat to Russia, but instead it would be to reassure nervous allies on NATO's eastern flank. He referred to the sacred obligation that America has with its NATO partners, but he did stop short and say that American and NATO forces would not be going into Ukraine. The president, underscoring the importance of all this, said that there would be enormous consequences that would befall Vladimir Putin's Russia. He said that he would not rule out personally sanctioning Vladimir Putin. He said that it would be beyond economic and political consequences.
And Stephen, let me ask you a bit more about that, because you asked the president if there were any scenarios where U.S. troops could be sent into Ukraine. He said no, but why is putting U.S. troops in Ukraine off the table?
Well, we have asked the White House this question before, and it's reiterated the idea of economic sanctions, targeted economic sanctions like Russia's never seen before, more painful than the Russian economy could perhaps withstand. And why not do more? Why not send American forces? Well, I think that the president recognizes that the American public are generally more wary. That this president presided over the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan a few months ago. And the president, when I put the question to him, it was a follow-up to his statement that there would be consequences beyond political consequences or economic consequences. I said, Mr. President, what about, are you talking about military consequences? And he said, quote, "There is not going to be any American forces moving into Ukraine," suggesting that for the moment, and perhaps beyond this moment, any kind of military consequences that would befall Vladimir Putin would not come at the hands of American troops.
That's such a good point, Stephen. He doesn't want to get out of one conflict in Afghanistan just to get into another one in Ukraine. Nicole, Senator Mitch McConnell said today that it looks like the administration is moving in the right direction when it comes to Ukraine. Now, that's rare praise from the Republican leader, but there are a number of Republicans who are pushing for the White House to take more decisive action and right away. What is it that these Republicans want the president to do right now?
Well, I think it's worth noting with respect to Leader McConnell, he has been in contact with members of the Biden administration, including a National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. So I think a part of his support thus far of the administration's position is that he has largely been kept in the loop and seems to feel, for the most part, comfortable with the steps that they are taking. That being said, we do know some Republicans want to push even further and are a bit more hawkish in their approach, in that they want to see more preemptive sanctions, if you will. They want to be able to see and really put Russia on notice that if they were to invade Ukraine, that simply is not acceptable. And, they want those consequences to hit well before Russia invades, if it invades. So that is part of the rationale of some Republicans who would like to take swifter action now, as opposed to, letting some of this diplomacy play out. Senator Lindsey Graham, for instance, spoke to some local reporters earlier today saying that, he believes that Putin should be sanctioned for provocation. So just the thought, the notion of provoking the situation to him is reason enough to act now. So we do know that a bipartisan group of senators did hold a call late yesterday to talk about potential sanctions. And so that is something that will need Republican buy-in, especially if the Senate wants to move quickly on something.
Well, Nicole, Congress is in recess this week, but today some top congressional aides got a confidential briefing from administration officials. Who was holding the briefing, and do we know anything about what they were told? Nicole, are you there? We appear to be having some technical difficulties. All right, if we can't get connected with Nicole, Stephen, if that's something that you can take, because this is a critical moment as we've been laying out. What do we know about this briefing at this point in time?
Well, I can tell you it was requested by congressional aides to the leadership, and this is the first stage of what will no doubt be a series of briefings undertaken by this administration to help members of Congress understand exactly what the American military may be getting involved with as the president puts 8,500 troops on heightened alert for a possible deployment to Eastern Europe. And why? Well, because the Congress needs to know exactly what it is that the American military may be getting engaged in. And of course, there's no question that this administration has repeatedly spoken of the sacred obligation that the United States has to its NATO partners under Article 5, which is it's a mutual defense pledge, which is to say that if any one of those countries that are members of the NATO treaty are attacked, then all of the NATO countries are attacked. But that said, the American the representatives in Congress require being briefed by the administration so that they might know exactly the thinking of the president and his top military and strategic advisors here. The interagency, we were told, that's sort of a Washington speak for the president's national security team, was said to be conducting that briefing. And I'm sure, what I understand is that similar briefings are likely to occur in the weeks ahead by the top officials of the President's National Security Team with the broader Congress, both in the House and the Senate.
Yeah, one thing we know is Congress always wants to have more information, not less. Stephen, I have to ask you about the president's hot mic moment yesterday where he called Fox News' Peter Doocy a profanity. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki addressed that comment and all the fallout today. Let's take a listen.
I would say what's most important, and it's Peter sitting here, so this is kind of a funny thing, but the president called Peter, and he confirmed this, so this is only why I'm speaking to this. And if you have private conversations with the president, I will assure you I'm not going to convey that on your behalf. But Peter spoke to this. The president called him. He conveyed to him that it was nothing personal, man, and also acknowledged that all of you are going to ask him a range of questions. So I think that speaks for itself.
Now, that was quite an explanation. President Biden obviously isn't the first president to get caught on a hot mic saying something like this, but he is the first one, Stephen, who made a point of saying at the start of his presidency that he wants people around him to speak to each other with respect. So what do you make of the way he and the White House are handling all of this?
Yeah, he said on his first day in office, swearing in some of the aides here at the White House, that if any one of them treated someone with disrespect, he would fire them on the spot. The press secretary said today the president understands that he's going to be asked a range of questions, and that was an important statement for her to make here to reporters. because what happened yesterday in a broader context was this. The President of the United States, at the end of a rather lengthy day, which featured a 1 hour and 20-minute virtual call with his European counterparts to discuss this Ukraine issue that we've been talking about here. The President followed that up by a meeting of a White House Council on Marketplace Competition. And he said, in response to our colleague Ed O'Keefe's question, that he had a very, very, very good meeting with the European leaders and that he would be saying more about it going forward, but that he really doesn't like answering questions at the end of events such as the one he had yesterday, because we reporters don't like to ask him questions about the event that's being staged at the moment. So it was another reporter who asked a question about the economy. Peter Doocy of Fox News said, "Do you see inflation as a political liability?" And the president said, mockingly, sarcastically, "It's not a liability, it's a great asset. Let's have more inflation." And he called the reporter an SOB. You're right, Nancy. He's not the first reporter to use that phrase into a microphone. In fact, our former colleague Peter Mayer of CBS News Radio pointed out that Ronald Reagan did it in 1986.
Important context there. Nicole, let me just ask you, because these are remarks that maybe the broader public hasn't heard about, but certainly have made the rounds on cable news and on social media. How are the president's remarks being received in the Capitol?
Well, I think it's a little hard to judge since lawmakers are out, in their districts. So I would say it's probably not necessarily top of mind for many of them. As we discussed earlier, I think probably the situation in Ukraine, the situation involving inflation, et cetera, is probably top of mind for lawmakers. But look, I mean, to the points that were made earlier, certainly the president has talked about the importance of decency, bringing decency back in the White House. That is something he talked about from day one. Was it a slip of the tongue? Potentially, but, it is a situation where, he was caught on tape and, has since made amends with that reporter for it. So I think this is something both the White House and more than likely many lawmakers want to turn the page on.
Right. And as you and Stephen and Nancy all know, it is perfectly within a reporter's right here in the United States of America to ask a president anything they want. Nicole Killiott and Stephen Portnoy, thank you both very much.